Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, Driving Test Automation to the Next Level. My name is Susie. I'm a member of the marketing team here at Sauce Labs. Joining me today are two test automation industry leaders, and they bring a wealth of expertise and experience to this conversation. We have with us Max Schultz, Head of QA Services at EPAM, and Ryan Vesley, Vice President of Global Technical Services here at Sauce Labs. Please join me in welcoming Max and Ryan for today's conversation. Ryan, the floor is yours.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Susie. Max, thanks for joining me. Really appreciate it. As Susie had mentioned, my name's Ryan Vesley. I'm the VP of Global Technical Services here at Sauce. And really what that means is I look after anything technical that is customer facing. So understanding customers' journeys, thinking about the challenges that they're trying to achieve and overcome, and ultimately just helping them think about their overall software delivery lifecycle as it relates to the tools that we can provide. Max, you want to give a quick intro before we get going?
Yeah, Max Schultz. I lead managed testing services at EPAM. So we're concentrated on helping, at any time, EPAM has about 500 to 1,000 testing projects globally. And we help from everything testing related. So automation, performance, security, UX, accessibility, into the manual side and crowd testing. So a broad offering, about 10,000 people in the testing practice at EPAM, and excited to talk about this today.
Awesome. And like any good partnership, the way that this whole thing was founded was, you think about tools, you think about the way that you're trying to get your software delivery cycle up and running, but you also need processes and people to help work through those types of processes on top of those tools. And that's really where this comes together. It's kind of why we are working together, why we're excited to talk to you today about it. And really what that boils down to is when you think about the types of software solutions that you're creating, the world depends on what you're doing, whether it's through a mobile device or a website or even a set-top box. Any kind of interface out there has the opportunity to dazzle the users that are working on it. So really every experience matters. And what that means is you really want to think about how it comes together every single time that a user is interfacing with your application on every device whenever they want, which really means that you need to have digital confidence to think about how you're publishing your software and creating those solutions together. And why that ultimately is so critically important is when we think about when a bad situation happens, when a user encounters something that didn't go as you had planned, you're going to start to see that the industry actually reacts pretty quickly about that kind of stuff. You're going to see that, for example, 25% might come back and write a negative review about the software, which not only damages their interaction, but potentially anybody who sees that going forward. You can actually see that through these types of interfaces or these types of interactions, people start to abandon the actual brands or just stop spending money with those types of services, which really impacts revenue and the bottom line. So really every experience matters, which is why ultimately we want to think about how these tools come together and really drive the visibility that you're looking for. Now, Sauce, as we kind of mentioned at the beginning, if you think about those people, process, and tooling, we're the tool side, right? We're the side that comes together and provides that visibility, which means we're executing tons and tons of tests. In fact, we've actually run more than 4 billion tests since the very beginning, and over 2 million per day is what that really comes down to. It's all SaaS provided, so wherever those applications are, we execute the tests against them, and we collect that data and allow you to analyze it through there. We have over 700 enterprise level customers and thousands of self-service customers. So they're really small startups that are coming together and growing with us over time. And we've been around for quite some time. We actually founded Sauce. The people that founded Sauce were actually the founders of Selenium as well, the creators of it. So we've grown over time through the tools that we've created to provide that landscape to ensure that you have the right kind of access. Through that process, we've also thought about the types of people that we're interfacing with, whether the actual practitioners, maybe the managers or the directors of QA or engineering, or even now to think about it from a point of view of the line of business owners, who actually is out there responsible for that revenue, who has always thinking about those experiences. And we want to provide the tools and mechanisms to provide the insights needed at all levels, whether it's going to be the person creating the code or the person running the business who wants to understand why an experience might be having a positive or negative effect along with that. The way we do it is we've created a set of tools that really interface, as I mentioned before, on any tool or any device that you can think of. So it could be a website, it could be a mobile app, it could be a set-top box, it could be an application that is built on top of some other application, like an SAP or a Salesforce. And of course, underneath all of that, there's a series of APIs that we want to be thinking about, whether they're your APIs and testing those or making data available through our APIs. When you think about approaching the software from that kind of space, what we're really talking about is really kind of poking at it from all aspects, whether it's a bunch of different browsers across a bunch of different operating systems or different devices that might be available, or again, different types of users, whether it's an actual person going through and visually seeing what they're looking for, or it's an automated machine that's trying to interface with an API and ensuring that they're getting the right kind of results to the contracts that they're expecting to see happen there. So really thinking about how software works and looking at it from all sides of that and providing the tools that are available from that side of tooling. And of course, all of that is built on top of industry-leading security and, without a doubt, our industry-leading partners like EPAM. And with that, I think, Max, I think you want to say a couple of things as well?
Yes, so thanks, Ryan. A quick background on EPAM. So we're the people side of the equation here. And so we bring 25 years of testing experience to the table. Like I said, about 10,000 full-time testing professionals, of which just over a third of those are test automation engineers and SDETs. And then we also have the capability of crowd testing with about 400,000 global Test.io crowd testers that were brought on by Test.io's acquisition. So we specialize in QA consulting and current state assessment. So this is where we come in at the request of VPs or CTOs who maybe are new in the role or have acquired companies and want to get an understanding of the maturity of their development processes, of their CI/CD, of their test data management, of their existing frameworks, and the efficacy of their entire kind of soup to nuts software development process. So we come in, we assess against the base standards that we have developed with our long experience and the exposure that we have in the market. And then we begin building a backlog on how to uplift those processes where needed. So this is where our technology partners come in, like Sauce Labs. We also have a number of internal accelerators that we've built that are open source or contributions to the open source community. And then just a general rooting in test automation excellence. EPAM at its core is a platform engineering company, and it is largely a company of engineers. And we certainly have an automation first mindset that we bring into every project. Now, I think we'll get to this later. That does not automate every single thing, which is a common request by executives who, come in and they might see an issue in production and then all of a sudden it's on your plate. But we do bring a holistic view with these accelerators, our technology partners, and the slew of services you see on the right here that ranges from exploratory testing all the way through performance and automation across all types of platforms. So just a quick background on EPAM. So large public company, publicly traded on the New York Stock Exchange, about 60,000 engineers. We do a little over $1 billion in revenue a quarter. So just to kind of give you the scale and exposure that we have in the market, something like a thousand customers at any given time. And so when we talk about our baselines, and we'll go into some kind of some highlights. We do an annual report on testing efficacy and kind of the current state of testing across projects in the whole portfolio. And I'll give some of these insights a little bit later, but it is really a broad slew across industry verticals and geographies as to what is the cutting edge in the market. So we can push into So, why do we partner? I think Ryan covered this, but it really is all around digital confidence. So our customers come to us not because they want to buy quality services. It's because they have a need to deliver quality experiences to their customers. And we bring the people, and then we have our partners who augment us in that effort. So we bring the Sauce Cloud platform and all the tools that are included with it, from the app distribution suite to the codeless automation tools, and ensure that our customer implementations of automation and of general testing procedures ensure cross-device coverage, and ensure generally that they are getting their money's worth from their investments in automation. So we've got a couple different things that we run with together. We've built this testing as a service, and it's a managed service offering where we can come in and atop that assessment, where we get an idea of current state, we make a recommendation for how we can augment and extend your teams in order to uplift automation across the board. So whether you're a SaaS company or a consumer-facing mobile app, we have delivery lines that can help you uplift your existing ship procedures and ensure that you can ship features on time, on schedule, with a highest level of quality in the industry. So I think we've got a handful more things that we can get into here, but let's just roll.
Dive into it. Sure thing. So I think Max and I were talking about this beforehand, and we've all been in webinars and demos where people talk through PowerPoint and they kind of show pictures of the applications and go through things, and those capture attention from time to time. But the ones that I've always enjoyed the most is where you just have a conversation. And that's really where I think Max and I are going to take this. Is we do have just some guidance slides about the topics that we're going to talk about, but really this is meant to be a conversation, and we invite you to take part in that. So if you have questions throughout this or want to go into deeper detail, we'll keep an eye on that. Susie, hopefully you can help us out there as well. If there are questions that pop up, we can get back to those as well. But for the most part, I really want to start out with just kind of going back to the very beginning and thinking about all of the things that are happening, right? So there are so many pieces of software out there in the world, so many creators of really great platforms that are constantly trying to solve problems and think about how they can provide that best experience as possible to their users. And they're looking for tools. They're looking for things that are out there that can help them get there. If you take a step back, though, from thinking about all of those various different things that are available, what is it that's really driving these questions? Why is it that customer experience or user experience is so important? And Max, I'm hoping maybe you can help us out here and just talk about what you're seeing are the most common challenges that the customers that you're working with are facing, and maybe how we can address them.
Yeah, so I think the most common ask that we get is just how do we deliver the most exceptional experience, device agnostic, across platforms, on an on-demand basis. So how can we get to this dream of CI/CD? Everybody talks about it. Everybody talks about having a DevOps culture, but very, very few achieve it. And I think that is kind of relates back to that question of, do you automate everything? And as you move forward or shorten your release cycles, you are iterating on a product faster and faster. And oftentimes we're seeing fragility of test suites, which becomes a really, really key issue in shipping new features. And this is, anytime your pass rates dip below 90%, we see a significant delay in the ability to ship new features. So as companies make more and more investments in test automation and are building large teams around this, they have to prove and be able to justify those investments. And with customer acquisition costs, user acquisition costs at all-time highs, you have very, very limited experience and time to get this right. So it's key to bring in the right tools, the right partners who can help you get this, who can help you address this up front, rather than playing catch up in production when you have real money, real revenue that you are probably responsible for if you're a QA leader or an engineering leader, and you need to make sure that you establish these things up front and as quickly as possible to help you ship fast but under stable conditions.
Yeah, it's interesting because I mean, look, I've been around the industry quite a bit. I've been on the monitoring side. I've certainly been on the testing side. So the concept of shifting left and shifting right, these buzzwords that we hear all the time, shifting left are, getting closer to development, faster into, as close to possible as design and development and before production, and shifting right is thinking more about how real users are interfacing with your software and what their experiences are. Having that kind of mentality then really factors into everything you're talking about. And I also think that what I've seen a lot is not only is it a cost of delayed time to ship features, but it's a distraction because you end up fixing the features that you've already shipped because a bug or a defect was introduced in production, impacting that user's experience. And if you can capture that before any user ever actually sees that, you stand a better chance of having a much more pleasing experience from that side of things.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've seen, alongside the increase in demand for stable automated coverage, we've seen a lot of companies roll back from significant goals in the 90 percentile of test automation coverage into something that is slightly more conservative and layers in a level of real human testing as well. So, I think that is another piece of this that, especially in consumer-facing applications, is maybe not talked about as much from the engineering or test engineering point of view, because the movement of the industry over the last couple of years has really been to automate everything, and you should automate every product that has reached a level of stability that you're not going to break automation with every new push that you make. Automating core flows, but also using the industry's tools like crowd testing or internal distribution of pre-production applications to a group of users that can emulate your real end users in a pre-production environment.
Right. And crowd testing is a great idea. I mean, you think about the nature of testing in general. When it was first created, it was, I'm going to assert everything that I can possibly think of that any user will ever interact with this application. And the likelihood of you figuring out every possible decision is pretty slim, realistically.
Yes. Humans are weird, and they do weird things with software. And your automation, it can absolutely test the core flows. It can test ancillary flows to that, but it is only going to cover the specific paths that you write that to cover. And unfortunately, as we all know very well, humans do not follow the straight and narrow path, and it becomes a key driver in ultimate app quality. When we start talking defect rates in production, we do see significant drops when we do layer in, especially for consumer-facing applications where the device spread, maybe it's across continents, becomes really, really important. And leveraging things like the Sauce Cloud for to get the cross-device coverage on the automation side, to ensure that their automation investments are being pushed out into the most broad array of devices as possible, but also layering atop real people under real network conditions becomes an important piece of the pie.
Yeah, I totally agree. And we're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves because there's a topic coming up about testing at scale that I want to save more of that conversation for. But maybe it is a good point to kind of switch our gears a little bit and talk about what we're seeing, not only on the market driver side, but there's obviously a huge push for mobile. Just like 5-10 years ago, the internet ate the world and everybody had to have the right kind of web browser on their desktop. Now it's all about mobile and just making sure that, exactly to your point, you think about how maybe in the States there's not as much reliance on a mobile device because a lot of people have laptops and computers, but the rest of the world, mobile is everywhere. And so I'm curious, in your experience and in EPAM's experience, are we seeing similar patterns of needs and questions that are being asked around mobile that we used to see all the time for web, or is it really a different process that we're encountering?
Yeah, I mean, it depends how you slice and dice our portfolio. So we do a lot of work with enterprise applications, right? And those are still stuck. Some of the customers and some of the industries are still stuck in legacy browsers because of IT, internal IT issues in their industry, right? But broadly speaking, I think the last numbers we looked at were over 60% of traffic for EPAM projects was from mobile devices. If you exclude out our segment that is strictly enterprise applications. So this is becoming
and that's globally, right?
That's globally, yes. And this is reflected in the industry. I think there's other global companies that have put out similar numbers, and we see, particularly with international rollouts, we get a lot of asks for how do we cover the ecosystem of Android devices that are out there, or of as you move into APAC, you have really different devices than you see in the US. And same goes as you roll into Eastern Europe and down into Africa and just generally global. There is such a wide ecosystem of devices. It's very challenging to keep up with. And this is where we do deploy Sauce Labs very closely. And we, from this report, and this is not a quote created for the webinar, projects where Sauce Labs is used have a higher concentration of being able to deliver new features within an hour. And these are our top tier projects, but this is because we have access to those devices that they must have their automated suites run on and be confident that there is a pass and a green on the screen before they will push into a production market, let's say in China, where you could be pushing out to a whole ton of people. And if you are not very confident in your pass rate, you're going to have issues that impact the top and bottom line of your business that you're responsible for.
Every experience matters, and
Yes.
There's a lot of them out there, no doubt about it. So just for those that aren't familiar with it, Max is talking about devices, and Sauce Labs certainly has thousands of devices, whether it's phones or tablets or again other types of devices that we're going to want to test on. But the other thing that we encounter quite a bit is we use emulators and simulators. So there's a big debate that we encounter quite a bit when we're talking to our customers about when do you want to test at scale with emulators and simulators versus when do you want to test on an actual device. And is there a benefit to be able to kind of go back and forth and understanding where those comes into play? What have you seen in that world?
It comes up in most conversations. So I think most of the time we don't see a significant difference on where test automation runs. It is most key to have speed of the automated test suite. So a lot of times when we walk in to do assessments, sometimes we see like multi-day executions of test suites that are massive, hundreds of thousands of test cases, right? And the idea is to get this down to an hour or a handful of hours as fast as we can possibly have. So if we have failures, we can ingest those, we can go through them, and we can see what needs to be fixed before a production deployment. But the crux of the projects that we see end up handling a lot of the real device testing, and the specific requirements around real device testing require testing in a country. So let's say we are, we're testing real payments in a given region. If we need MasterCards in Mexico, that is an application that is specifically set for crowd testing, and you have to have a real person with a card who has a bank account in Mexico, who can execute on a specified device. But I would say we don't see as strong of opinions on test automation. The key is more speed rather than real device versus emulator, as long as they deliver on the similar level of quality.
Got it. Makes total sense. And I mean, it's a perfect segue. It's almost like we have it scripted into our next topic, which is testing at scale. And one of the things that you just mentioned that I think is really interesting, especially when you think about one of the new innovations that Sauce made, which is app distribution into a beta environment. So we have a solution that automatically creates opt-in for real users to download and access an app, while at the same time the developers are able to finely tune which version of the app is distributed out. What I'm talking about, if anybody has heard of this before, we acquired a company called TestFairy fairly recently, which allows that kind of functionality where it's getting beyond, and we're talking about more of that shifting right side of things, getting beyond assuming you know what the user is going to do, to actually let the beta testers in a safer environment before you go to full production tell you what really is important and what you may have missed. That in and of itself, just getting the software out is a challenge, which is why we're so excited that we have this kind of management tool available. But maybe you could talk a little bit about the difference between automated testing, thinking about crowd testing, and how you've seen beta management before we get into actual production using real people. The example you just gave, for example, for the banking in Mexico is a really good example. Are there other types of strategies that we can put in place, or that the audience might be interested in hearing?
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of strategies that we can get into, and I think we have a like the banking in Mexico type of example is something that we call product experience testing, and this is where you get into bespoke requirements around IoT testing, where there's a physical device need, streaming testing, where there's a physical device need, and we're working together on some skunkworks developments with Sauce Labs on how to solve this. And also the real payment stuff. So that is working with card issuing companies around the world to provide cards or bank accounts per regulations that are required in that industry to facilitate real testing and production. But I think back to Sauce Labs acquisitions and the ways that you've helped us in our customer engagements. So I think one of the things that we generally struggle with is app distribution, and I think the App Store and Apple's infrastructure with TestFlight has changed over the years to make this slightly easier, but it is still a burdensome process to manage app distribution internally in that platform. And the same goes for across Android. So when we get a lot of requests from big companies. Let's say we're dealing with a large beverage vendor, to leave names out of it, and they have tens of thousands of people who work in their warehouses, who maybe want to do some extra mile work. How do we, in a managed way, distribute a pre-production application for that company to give their employees opportunities to A, learn a new skill, like get into software testing, B, they're probably the target user for these applications, right. And C, it just becomes a nice thing that like a marketing organization can do to help quality assurance in a large organization. So we can use things like TestFairy to centrally distribute these applications out. We call them kind of bring your own tester type of engagements. And then on the other side of that, we use TestFairy to distribute applications to Test.io crowd testers. So if you don't have the luxury of having large internal bodies of workers, we can apply our crowd with the TestFairy infrastructure, allowing you access to 400,000 people is the big pool. Any given time, we have about 10,000 of those people testing. And then we can slice and dice from there to the actual requirements geographically. device-wise or whatever the requirements are of your specific testing needs. But having a central place to govern that beta release is often what we have to have in place in order to assuage security concerns for distribution to either crowd workers or to non-trusted folks in an organization.
Right. And it's interesting because, again, like in my head, I keep going back to this concept of your assumptions and your assertions, that you think you know what the users are going to do, so therefore you write these tests. You get out into beta testing and you start to see that maybe you were right, maybe you weren't right. You can even go further into the production side of things and start looking at the actual crash reports and error reports that happen in devices. So another solution that we've recently innovated is just that, is collecting real user information on the device itself, being able to see not just what's triggering that issue, but what happened before it, right? What was the user journey looking like, and how did that crash or that issue arise that caused that degraded experience for that user, and how can you prevent it? Again, what I'm talking about there is another acquisition that we did called Backtrace. And it is just that, it's the ability to capture the errors from a device in the real world, in production. You can do it certainly in beta, but you can also get it pushed out into the wild, so that when any given user is downloading an app from an app store or from any location, they have that built into the app itself. What is the appetite that you're seeing for more of that shift right side of things? Because obviously testing spaces, you're focusing more on those assertions, but it feels to me like we're getting closer and closer to thinking about closing that loop of build, measure, learn, right? You build something, measure how it was done, and then you got to learn how it actually happened, and then go back and do it all over again. What are you seeing as a shift in that regard? How is that appetite forming?
Yeah, well, pop up Instagram and shake it, and you see that in production at one of the biggest companies in the world, right? You can do bug reporting in a production environment very, very easily, and you can bet that contains all of the error logging information that a developer needs in order to understand the user journey and to pull back all of the logs and all the information they need to fix that. I think we are starting to see this as a very common piece of general testing requirements. So obviously you can get all the log information from an automated test suite if the framework is set up well. We're using cloud infrastructure that allows us a high level of reporting back and what the failure was. In the manual side of the testing business, we see this as well. Developers, everybody here has I'm sure filed tickets for bugs that you have found. How many times have you gotten back the question, where are the log files? Send me the console screenshot, send me the URL this occurred on. Having that in an integrated environment with app distribution, in the form of an SDK or whatever, however this is integrated, is the way that we are going to see this play out in the future. This type of monitoring is standard, not really optional for leading customer experiences. And it really comes down to this whole theme of this webinar, and the whole theme that we're seeing in the industry is just exceptional experiences, device agnostic. Even enterprise applications that are historically desktop based, we're seeing people, whether they're working from home on their tablets or they're out on the road, they are shifting to being mobile, if not mobile first, very, very extremely mobile friendly. And this type of infrastructure is what helps companies understand what is actually happening, even if they think that their automated tests pass and everything is good. There are things that we all know happen in production that are weird, and we need as much visibility into them as possible to fix them quickly.
Yeah, predictability is a wonderful goal, but it gets infinitely harder when you start introducing people into the situation and not really relying on logic.
Yeah,
like you said before, people are weird. They do weird things. All right, so we talked a lot about how people can think about test strategies and what are the questions they're asking about. We talked about mobile versus web, talking about scale. One thing that you keep mentioning is this concept of frameworks and framework assessments that you're doing. We on the Sauce Lab side really try to stay as agnostic as possible so that we can work with a bunch of different frameworks that are out there. There's obviously the rise of more of the native frameworks when you get into Espresso or XCUI test or those types of things. There's a bit of a debate that I've seen happening as to whether or not you want to focus on the really native stuff or if you want to focus on more of the agnostic things that are out there, or just grow your own and come up with your own stuff. I'm curious, what are you seeing with your customers? Is there a standard that's arising, or is it really just still wild, wild west out there?
Yeah, so I would say that EPAM, being a platform engineering company and a major contributor to open source technologies, still tends to stay in the open source field. So unless you have unique requirements which require us to use something off the shelf, and there are specific times when we do use things that are commercial off the shelf software for test automation, we do generally rely on things like Selenium and Appium, which are kind of the gold standards for UI automation. It's where you can find the most staff to do these types of things, whether it's onshore or with a vendor. But we are seeing a lot of emerging demand for things like Cypress, where they're just moving past, or they're seeing trends in the industry where these frameworks are rising up and presenting advantages over the historically dominant frameworks. But one thing that we do is we have built a series of accelerators for the open source frameworks that we do deploy. So we have something called Selenium that layers on a machine layer atop a Selenium-based framework to help improve stability and self-healing. And so there are things that you can do to up-level existing open source frameworks that maybe have the best. If you're out in this very competitive hiring environment and you're trying to hire for very specific skill sets, that can be challenging. There are ways to make kind of these historic frameworks stronger and that are available in the open source community. So that said, we are seeing a significant shift and demand for codeless automation. And I think I saw a question up here like, is the goal to replace test automation engineers? And that answer is firmly no. Like our business, we're a services business, and we deploy these codeless automation tools quite often. And so you would think that's kind of the antithesis of what we want to do, but it's really not, because a lot of times test automation engineers still have a ton of work, and probably more work than they can keep up with without these bespoke use cases. You look at Sauce Labs added, we were doing a lot of talking over the last couple of years about the rise of codeless. Sauce Labs ended up doing an acquisition in the space, and it has helped us on the enterprise application side, where typically we don't have the same level of test automation engineer doing UI automation. So we're able to use this off-the-shelf tool with someone who is a strong business analyst who maybe has dabbled in test automation, but we can use them for specific use cases in enterprise applications. And I know, Ryan, you should probably speak to the broader capabilities of Autonomic, but that's where we've seen the kind of bread and butter use cases, expanding our test automation force rather than contracting it, and making sure that we are able to add on UI automation with other people involved in test automation efforts.
Yep. And what Max is talking about exactly right is one of the acquisitions we did recently were around codeless testing, or low code testing, if you will. He mentioned it. It's a company called Autonomic that we just acquired. It is the machine learning layer that really focuses, as he mentioned before, on self-healing, right? So identifying through artificial intelligence, what are the key indicators on a given interface, whether it's a web page or a mobile app, and thinking about how those change over time. It's very similar in nature to another tool that we have around the visual side of things, when thinking about recognizing and adapting the way that we test against what the predictable layers are going to be inside of the application, so that you can either accept the change that you know is already there, or allow it to learn as it goes from that point of view and kind of adapt as it goes. That self-healing aspect of it. There's been a couple of questions that I think we've handled on our talk so far. I'm just gonna read them out real quick just to make sure that you don't want to add anything to it. So the first one that I noticed is, which Susie, that I think you just also talked about as well in the chat, is what are the most popular testing tools to run automation for web and mobile, and what are we using? I think you more or less covered that, but anything you want to add to that one before we move on?
I think we covered it. There's maybe in the outcome or in the slides that we send out, we can add some of the EPAM State of Continuous Testing report if you want to get specifically into the frameworks that are being used across projects. But I don't think there's much more than we've discussed today. Largely Selenium for UI, and then there's growing demand for things like WebDriver and Cypress and the other kind of next gen Tosca, some bit of BDD stuff, but I feel like I have just heard that less in the industry over the last year and a half or so. Yeah, Ryan, I don't know if you are hearing anything different
on the next two. So it looks like you're looking at the chat as well. So that's good. So I think we covered that one. I think some of the things that we were just talking about in terms of getting to scale and kind of understanding how it all comes together from that point of view. Really, one of the things that I want to bring it back to in one of the first topics we brought up, and actually it was one of the questions that was sent to us ahead of time, which we've been talking about a little bit about automating everything. Is it smart to automate everything? And with all the tools that are available and the strategies that you talked about, I think it's clear that maybe automating everything is a good objective to get to when you're ready, when you have the degree of predictability that you're expecting. But maybe we can talk a little bit about automating the right things, and how do we really focus in and identify what are the right flows to think about, and what are the strategies around what's okay to automate because it's standard and you're ready to go, and maybe what should be more manual. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, a lot of times we get from the Fortune 500 to startups, we get VPs of quality, VPs of engineering that have a directive from a CEO who says automate. I want full automation coverage, and I think it is a good goal from the executive level. And it's actually a good thing for everyone on this call that you have this support to, budget for people, process, and tools to address that. But I think what you want to do as a mature leader of quality is to push back and say we should automate everything that is ready to automate. And this is just an important differentiation when you're talking about new product development, really pushing. Like if you are developing really new features that are going to be changed daily or weekly, it is going to be challenging, and it's going to be additional burden for your test automation team to keep up with really structural changes that you make to features or products. Now, that's not to say that you should wait until the 23rd hour to be automating your tests. I think once you reach a reasonable level of stability where maybe you are making smaller, more incremental updates on a bi-weekly basis, that absolutely makes sense. Have your core flow covers, have a significant regression test in place, but don't worry about overextending your automated coverage into the small forks off the side that maybe remain experimental. If they're experimental, keep them on the manual side of your shop. And that will allow you to push faster. That will allow you to iterate faster. You won't be, you talked about opportunity cost earlier. You won't be pulling test automation engineers back from core test automation to fixes on things that might break next week because of a further update. So just be conscious of where you are applying these very expensive and limited resources almost across the board. Make sure that they are going into just separate out your core automation efforts from those that are kind of extra mile or nice to haves, and make sure you're prioritizing there in the same way that you would for product development.
Yeah, yeah, and there's another side to it too, and that is a term that I've heard quite a bit of, test dormancy. Well, we've always tested this. We should always test it. Well, should we? I mean, is that feature still in use? How do you know when it's okay to not test something?
Yeah, I think that goes into the reporting tools and usage metrics that you have about your own product, right? Like I think that is an area where we're seeing a lot of technologies developed where we are connecting kind of our framework and our test coverage to actual product usage, and looking at ways of connecting those things more tightly to ensure that we have very, very broad and comprehensive coverage around the hot areas in the app. So, you know, what you might define as your core application might not be reflected in your user metrics. So as a part of our assessment process, that has grown a lot over the years, is looking specifically at usage patterns of the product, where the user journey, where it is written. And when we interview people, we interview product managers, we get their view, and then we go into the numbers and the analytics. And oftentimes there's two different answers there. And that allows us to really up the efficacy of the test automation implementation if we are following the reality, not the design.
Yeah, it becomes a checks and balances to achieve the goals that the PM wants to actually go for, but also keeps it a bit reality as what the users are actually seeing, what the tests are actually showing, and where we can go from there.
Yeah,
we've covered a lot in a very short amount of time, and before I open it up for the rest of the audience to ask any other questions that come into play, is there anything you wish that I had added or offer up to the audience in terms of either getting started or kind of where they can go from their journey?
Sorry, I lost you for a second there, but I think in general, if you see opportunities, you know, most people on this call are Sauce Labs familiar. You're probably a Sauce Labs customer. If you have issues around your test automation implementation, whether it is speed, whether it's breadth of coverage, whether it's stability, or the ancillary things to test automation, test data management, and those types of things, and you're seeking some expertise, Sauce can facilitate just a conversation between us. We can bring in a test automation architect, and we can just have a conversation around how we would help you and your team to uplift and, you know, expand your device coverage, for instance, in terms of your automation. Your automation spend, and making sure that you are getting a solid investment out of the spend that you are making. And there's a bunch of other things in our assessment process. Again, we'll put some additional slides into an appendix in the deck that goes out here that'll give you a little bit more color on that. But I think the Sauce Labs team is well aware. We have a lot of joint case studies between major enterprise clients and startups alike, that are leveraging the Sauce suite of products, as well as EPAM and Test.io services. And so, yeah, I think.
Yeah, no, I think that's good. Well, before we do anything else, thank you for your time. I greatly appreciate the teamwork, and it's always good to kind of just, you know, have a conversation about the industry that we live and breathe in. Susie, I'm going to go ahead and to see if there are any questions that we have from the audience, or if there are topics that people want to talk about that we didn't cover. Might be a good time to open that up.
Absolutely. Thank you, Ryan. Thank you, Max. Like you said, Ryan, we definitely covered a lot in a short amount of time, and did touch on several of the questions that I was seeing come in. A couple that I don't think got to specifically that I'll add into the conversation here. One question in the Q&A today: among your arsenal of testing tools, can you talk about the two roles of testing? One of those being showing that things work, and the other being finding bugs or problems and assessing their severity.
Yeah, so I think given that the question was asked about tools, I'll start with that, and then Max, if you can kind of piggyback on top of that and talk about how we can actually use them. I think what's important to think about is where your users are, right? So there's so much time is spent trying to figure out what the right environment is and what the right flow is for your business case. Many times it also comes down to where your users are actually interfacing with your application. Is it a mobile device? Is it the website? Is it a kiosk somewhere? Is it some other type of interface, a set-top box on a TV, for example, or an Xbox, those types of things? Because people can access all that information from so many different places, it's really important that you collect information from all of those locations, which is why Sauce Labs has that, right? So we have the ability to think about whether it's the bare basics of is it a website or is it a mobile side, but also the types of interfaces. Is it a visual question? Are we seeing the right kind of presentation and display? Is the right text showing up? Is it, again, more of the things around the way that the users are interfacing through an API, right? Is a middleman type of thing, and being able to make sure that you're getting the right kind of responses from those APIs. Sauce has done a really great job of expanding as much of a broad set of tools to address each one of those, that, again, like Max was saying before, we can ensure that we give you the right kind of coverage in the post deck here that talks about each one of those areas. But we really think about it from a point of view of giving you as early as possible information from a test, the shifting left side of things, get it to the developers as fast as possible, all the way through to where your users actually are on the production side and every step in between, so that you can really form a better picture with the data that we provide that really informs the kinds of actions that you're going to take.
Yeah, and
which, Max, I'm going to ask you to talk about.
Sorry, I lost your last 5 seconds there, but I think I got it. I mean, the question to me breaks down to your automated tests versus your real bug bounty, like manual testing in the wild type things. We didn't really get into beyond talking about test automation. We talked about some UI testing. Absolutely need API layer testing. Absolutely, the most mature development pipelines that we have non-functional quality gates as well, where security and performance tests are gates in the pipeline. And so those are things where we define them as, like, we know this works. We know these checkboxes are checked. We know these meet these certain criteria because they're written against an automation criteria, and they are checked against that. The manual side is probably the hardest part of being an automation or a quality engineering or quality assurance leader, is balancing the right level of manual testing versus test automation. Probably maybe 10 out of 10 leaders would say, if I had to choose a profile, I would choose 10 out of 10 automation engineers versus adding in another manual tester. But I think that goes back to that question of prioritization, and making sure that you are not either overcommitting highly skilled resources to work that is best done by someone who is a functional tester, and just looking at really prioritizing, like you are a product manager, the core things and the core activities that automation should cover, from UI to API to the more broad security and performance tests that have to happen to deliver exceptional experiences, and then balancing out what you can budget for manual testing and who you can put on that. And that is where the bug finding prioritization has to come in.
Right.
Great. Yeah, thank you both. Couple more questions I want to get to, if we can, within the last couple minutes. So one, maybe just a quick answer, and we can follow up with more. Coming back to, Max, you mentioned Tosca, you mentioned BDD earlier. We were talking about tools and setting up automation. One question asking if Tosca is going to replace Selenium as a posit to this group, and someone else asking about BDD with Cucumber. Could we speak briefly about those two tools and frameworks?
Yeah, Ryan, do you want me to take that, or do you want to take that?
Yeah, Max, why don't you go ahead and take it if you don't mind?
Yeah, I think it's hard to say that that any proprietary tool is going to outright replace an open source framework that has as broad of market adoption as Selenium has. I think Tosca certainly has its advantages in that it is a codeless tool. They layer in some fancy tools on the AI side of things that help you address fragility and keep up with product development. But I think there's also layers on the open source side that can do that as well. Like I said, we have a Selenium accelerator that sits on top of Selenium to make it much more robust, and it keeps you in the open source framework game. And the thing that we say and that we hear from most of our customers is if I leave EPAM, like what am I going to do if I'm with a proprietary tool? And it's a risk that you have to assess yourselves. I think there are certain cases where low code absolutely makes sense, and it just depends on whether you have the resources to extend a full test automation team that can do ongoing maintenance and triage and all of the things that are associated with having test automation running on a given product, or whether let's say you're working with your sales ops team is asking for test automation support, and you want to push them a tool that they can use to execute or to build up some automation in their flows. And I think those use cases right now are where we're seeing the highest concentration of low code or codeless. And I don't expect there to be a significant shift, at least in the coming year.
Great, thank you. We're coming up at the end of our time, and before we close out, just want to give both of you, Max and Ryan, a chance to share any takeaways, actions that we can give to this audience as they continue on their test automation journey.
Yeah, I think go ahead, Ryan.
Oh, sorry, Max, go ahead.
No, I think in delivering exceptional experiences, it's a mix of people, process, and technology. And I think if you do not be limited to the resources that you have internally. There are a lot of companies. EPAM is just one of them that can provide really tactical advice on how you can uplift your quality your quality expertise, your implementations, and how your CI/CD pipeline is effective in shipping new products to your customers. So I think in general, if you have not worked with an outside consultancy, we really know back and forth how to implement sauce successfully, and we really have a lot of broad exposure to both excellence and not so great, and how to bring those two things together. And so if you want to talk about that, please contact your sauce representative, and they'll get us in touch.
Totally agree, and I'm noticing that my Wi-Fi is deciding to be very mischievous, and I keep freezing up, so hopefully I'm okay right now. But yeah, I completely agree with what I heard Max say in terms of thinking about how we address it. Please do be on the lookout for a follow-up email from Sauce Labs, where we will provide not only the deck that we use, but also some additional information and ancillary information around the products and the services that EPAM provides. Max, again, really enjoyed the time. Thanks for helping me talk about these really interesting topics. And I personally look forward to hearing from the audience and just helping you all succeed in what you're trying to do. It's really exciting.
Absolutely.
Wonderful. Max, Ryan, thank you for the time, for the insights. To everyone who's still on with us now, thank you for tuning in and for your questions. Really appreciate all of the engagement here. I know we didn't get to all of the questions, but like Ryan said, we will have follow-up going out. You will have ways to reach us, and we would love to continue this conversation with you. So with that, again, thank you all for attending. Thank you, Max and Ryan, for presenting, and I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of their day.